have a great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Maria Paola Scaparra. She is a professor of management science and a member of the Center for Logistics and Heuristic Optimization. Paola was awarded Master Science in Engineering, Economic Systems and Operations Research at Stanford University, then PhD in Mathematics applied to economic decisions at the University of Pisa. She held the position of a postdoctoral researcher in infrastructure and transportation planning at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and moved to Kent Business School in 2024, where she is now. Paola's research focuses on the development of analytics tools and optimization models for disaster management, humanitarian logistics, healthcare service planning, transportation planning, and sustainable development. Recently, Paola investigated how ORAR can contribute to the achievement of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and help solve intractable challenges in developing countries. She has published many papers and book chapters on these topics in top-ranked operational research and geography journals, and has been involved in several international multidisciplinary and consultancy projects. Paola got funding from EPSRC, Global Challenging Research Funds, GCRF, Innovate UK, DSTL, etc. Paola is member of the General Council of our society. She serves in the Education Committee. She was member of the Scientific Committee for the 2021 CAPS Academic Journal Guide. She is a member of the Committee of Professors of Operational Research, COPIR, and the Euro Working Group on Locational Analysis. She is also a member of the editorial board of the journal IISE Transaction, Area Scheduling and Logistics, and the journal International Regional Science Review. I can talk more about Paola's achievements and her CV, but I don't want to take more of her time for a talk that is entitled People-Centered ORAR for Global Challenges. Paola, the Zoom is yours.
Thank you so much, Sandra, for the very nice introduction and for the invitation also to come and speak today at the annual meeting of the Our Society. If you can go, yes, to the next slide, please. So today I will talk about a few projects that I've been working on, I would say, in the last decade in developing countries. So these projects started, in fact, in 2015, when the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals were first launched. Next slide, please. So I will first give a very brief introduction to the SDGs, although now we are pretty much all very familiar with them. And then I will talk about different projects across different areas, starting from flood mitigation in Vietnam, which was my first GCRF project, moving then to a capacity building project to build OR capacity in several countries in Southeast Asia. And then I will talk about my most recent research, which is in healthcare in Africa. And then I will conclude the talks with some takeaways and lessons learned from working in these projects, so using OR tools and techniques in developing countries. Next slide, please. So I mentioned already the UN Sustainable Development Goals were launched in 2015 to be achieved by 2030, and are really a universal call to actions to end poverty, to protect our planet, and improve the lives and prospects of everyone, everywhere. So there are 17 different goals, ranging from goal number 1, which is about no poverty, to goal number 17, which is about building partnerships for the goals. Now, the goals that I mostly address in my research are goal number 3, about good health and well-being, especially for my latest projects in Africa, and prior to them, goal number 9, about infrastructure, and number 13, about climate action. Next slide, please. So I mentioned briefly the GCRF because this is the funder that has funded most of my research. So this was launched in 2016 following the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And it was a scheme to fund research in developing countries. So it was part of the UK official development assistance and funding research so that UK researchers could really help support and develop research in developing countries. So over the years has supported many partnerships, about 400 in countries all over the world. But unfortunately, it was terminated in July 2021 due to cuts to the ODA. In 2022, has been replaced by the International Science Research Fund, but in a much smaller scale. So it's nothing like it was before. And just to give you a general sense of what the GCRF was a funding umbrella that was giving money to all the research councils, to the British Academy, British Council, Royal Society of Engineering. So it was funding projects ranging from very small networking projects to very large consortia and hubs. So next slide, please. It was already bad news, unfortunately, that in 2021, the GCRF was cut. As you can imagine, massive investment had been made to develop partnerships, and there was kind of a little bit of reputational damage because some of the projects were really cut in the middle. Now, the situation today is even worse, if anything, because as you probably know, in January 2025, with the new administration in the United States, there were massive cuts to, again, international aid. And the US AID agency was completely dismantled in the US. So this has massive repercussion, obviously, in many wonderful programs that were run, for example, in Africa for vaccine distribution, as well as program for disaster response, like the ones you can see the picture here, the recent earthquake in Myanmar. And so these cutting funds were not limited to the US, because even here in the UK, further spending went towards defense. And in March, the government has announced also cuts to international aid. And in fact, we were kind of damaged by this because we were writing a big grant proposal for NIR, for a global health research program. And we received then a communication that following the Prime Minister announcement to reduce official development assistance, this program was unfortunately suspended. Next slide, please. Now, the situation, unfortunately, was already not great in terms of the progress towards the SDGs achievements, as you can see in this picture. So these represent the overall progress across the different targets up to June 2024. So I mentioned that there are 18 goals in the agenda, and for each goal there are several targets, for a total of 169. For these, there are global data to measure and to assess the advancement for about 134 of them. And as you can see, only 70% of the target are actually on track to be met by 2030. About 50% made moderate progress or marginal progress, but the most concerning figure is that 70% of them are below the baseline in 2015. So there has been a regression rather than advancement. And many of these unfortunately affect, for example, healthcare, for maternal mortality rate, or the children mortality rate, are all targets that unfortunately have seen a regression. Next slide, please. So in about 2017, when the GCRF scheme was launched, I applied and I got some funding from the British Academy to work on a project about mitigating flood impacts in road networks in Vietnam. So as you can see from the images, I think you can understand what the problem is. Like this country is affected by a lot of floods. These are becoming more intense, more frequent, and they create a lot of disruption in cities which are already heavily congested. So if you go to the next slide, I have a very short video which was produced by KMTV, a local TV here supporting the research at the University of Kent, describing the project.
A land rich with history and culture, it's also one of the fastest growing economies in Asia. Yet the annual monsoon season has wreaked havoc for the Southeast Asian nation, challenging its development and devastating its people. In the last 50 years, more than 5,000 Vietnamese have lost their lives and 25 million have suffered displacement and disruption, making the country the fourth most impacted by flooding in the entire world. Mass urbanisation, ageing drainage systems and climate change have all exacerbated the problem, especially on the country's deteriorating road network. So how to tackle this problem? Working with local authorities, researchers and communities, a team from the Kent Business School has taken a science-driven approach to planning. Using analytical tools including simulations, the team are researching the impacts of flooding on road networks in Vietnam's cities, identifying cost-efficient investments which will lessen the social and economic damage. This pioneering research will now be investigated in 5 other Southeast Asian countries and has the potential to change the lives of millions in the region, and all through the wonderful world of analytics.
Next slide, please. So this project was highly interdisciplinary. There were different teams involved, 2 teams here in the UK and different teams in Vietnam. It was interdisciplinary because we work with the social scientists, so we work with hydrologists, meteorologists, people in the Ministry of Transport. You see from the logo there, TDSI is a lab, an institute which is part of the Ministry of Transportation. So basically what we wanted to do at the beginning was to assess the perception of local people in terms of impacts of floods. Then we reviewed the different investment programs. We had the hydrologist group generating flood maps for the city of Hanoi, and then we used all this information to set up an optimization tool to try to identify what were the best investments over time to mitigate the impact of floods on the roads of Hanoi city. And then we applied this to the city. Next slide, please. As the title of this presentation captured, we wanted to have a people-centered approach. So we wanted to have a bottom-up approach to make sure that we were really addressing the needs of the local community and the communities who were not imposing our own solutions. So the first step was to assess the impacts of floods. And for this, we have surveyed about 500 people in Hanoi, including both residents, but also visitors. So as you can see from the pictures, in Hanoi, it's very typical, especially for women, to come from the countryside to sell their produce in the cities. And when there are floods, obviously, there is major disruption. They can't sell their products, and this has a massive implication, obviously, on their wealth and on their daily lives. So we set up this survey and semi-structured interviews with the local people. We consider also the gender dimension, and that we'll come back to this aspect later on in the talk. And from this survey, what we identified is that the major impacts, according to the perception of the communities, were on the roads and due to prolonged traffic congestions and to the damage to its infrastructure itself. So it was quite surprising because the people we interviewed, they were putting like the damage to the roads and the congestion even before the damage to their own households. So that's why we decided to focus especially on these aspects. And in terms of the perceived cause of flooding, the major cause caused by the respondent was the aging drainage system. So the city of Hanoi has grown at a very fast pace, but the drainage system didn't follow the same pace. So it is quite obsolete. So this has informed our model, which I describe later, and we decide to focus on intervention to the drainage system in the city. Next slide, please. So in the second work package of this project, we reviewed the master plan of the drainage company in Hanoi, and we got like a list of different projects, mitigation projects, including, for example, the rehabilitation of lakes. So in Hanoi city, if you're familiar with that city, there are many, many lakes. Other projects could be, for example, the construction of new reservoirs or increasing the capacity of existing reservoirs, construction of manholes, and so on. And from the drainage company, we also got information about the cost of these projects, which catchments in the city they were affecting, different structural details, which again, we incorporated in our model. Next slide, please. We work also, I mentioned before, with the team of meteorologists and hydrologists. We use like the weather and research forecast model to estimate the precipitation, to simulate heavy rainfalls in the city of Hanoi. And then they incorporated these results in another model, the MicroUrban, which is used by hydrologists to simulate the flow of water in a city. So they combine this precipitation data with the topological data of the drainage system in Hanoi, and they simulated the flow of water for different flood scenarios with a return period of 20 years and 100 years. Next slide, please. So as you can see from these images, those are the flood maps which were generated for us by the hydrologists. Now, the 100-year return period, unfortunately, we've heard a lot about this very recently with the big flood in Texas. It means that there is a 1% chance that the flood occurs every year. Although, like now, the frequency of what are defined as the 100-year return period floods is actually increasing. And so we got these flood maps, and then the challenge a little bit was how to incorporate this in our models. So this is very typical when you work across different disciplines with people from other, with knowledge of different areas, where, okay, these are the flood maps, but how we can use this data inside an optimization model. What came out is that behind these maps, though, there is a giant spreadsheet with a lot of data. And then as soon as we saw the numbers, we said, okay, now we know how to deal with that. Next slide, please. So we set up this optimization model. The main decisions were which flood mitigation projects from this master plan that we analyzed to implement and when, considering a time horizon of 20 years. The objective, which was informed by the community assessment that they ran, was to minimize the impacts on road congestion and damage in different flood scenarios. And we had several constraints, that we have a limited budget every year. We had to capture in the model the impact of projects on congestion and damage, and we had to use different functions that we found in the literature. And then we got a lot of inputs from all the different partners. So I mentioned already the flood maps from the hydrologists, the list of projects with the cost and catchments. We got information about the road network. We knew also the vehicle speeds on the roads, depending on the water level. Next slide, please. So we'll not go into the details of the model. I just put a couple of slides, but it's incomplete. Like the full model is in a paper that has been recently published in Nature, but it's a very complex model with a lot of set representing the scenarios, the water levels, the set of road segments, the catchments, the projects, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. So this is what you can see is just the first page of a couple of pages of different constraints, where you can see, for example, that we use as the objective the minimization of a combination of damage and congestion. And then we have all the different sets of links to capture and to compute the damage and congestion based on the selection of different projects. Next slide, please. We then applied this to the city of Hanoi, and as I mentioned before, to a time horizon with 20 years. We consider the 8th central district of the city. So we have 35 catchment, 377 road segments. We have the vehicle speeds for the different water levels, as I mentioned before. So we ran the model to try to inform about the best, the optimal combination of projects to implement over time. Next slide. So two of the main findings for these projects were, number one, that there were some projects in the master plan that had no impact whatsoever on the reduction of damage and congestion. So those could be ruled out. And then another important finding was that more than 50% of the reduction in both damage and congestion could be achieved just with less than 20% of the budget to implement all the projects. As you can see in these two pictures displaying how the damage and congestion could be reduced for different budget levels. Next slide, please. Now, to allow the users to use our model, we also developed a decision support system with different forms so that the road planners and the city planners in Hanoi could use the tool. Next slide, please. So just to give you an example, here you can see a map of Hanoi, of the 8th central district. The map on the left represents the city before the project implementation, and the map on the right is after the project implementation. And the color code represents areas which are normally heavily affected by flood, the one in red. Orange means medium damage, and the yellow is low damage. And as you can see, after the project implementation, some of the areas, for example, the orange area in the north becomes yellow, showing like a decrease in damage, and there are some red areas in the middle of the region that become orange. Next slide, please. And there is another form that displays similar results, but for the congestion of the roads. So the heavy blue links represent roads with high congestion when there is a flood. And if you see, for example, in the north part of the region, there is a blue link that becomes light blue after the implementation of the projects. So this way, like the stakeholders and the city planners could easily identify which areas of the city could be affected more by the implementation of the projects. Next slide, please. So like the major takeaways of this project, there were many, but I highlighted some that have kind of consequences in the other projects we work on. First of all, this project highlighted the need for people-centered and also gender-sensitive approaches, which is the respondents in this in the survey and in the assessment we ran really highlighted the fact that women in general, at least in Vietnam, are much more affected by flood disasters, both because they're usually in charge of having to do all the cleaning up, they can't bring children to school, they cannot sell their products, and so on. It also was very important because it fostered new partnerships and projects in Vietnam. For example, there were some of our partners who had not worked together before, which was kind of surprising, like the Institute of Meteorology had never worked with the Ministry of Transport. And after this project, they started working together on other projects as well. Also, it promoted the use of OR and analytics for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and created momentum also for developing an OR culture in Southeast Asia that then led to the CREST OR projects, which I will mention shortly. Next slide, please. In terms of follow-up for our projects for flood mitigation in Vietnam, in 2024, so last year, we received funding by the British Council to fund 2 fellowships. So we are currently, in fact, hosting 2 fellows from Vietnam to work on 2 different projects. One on flood resilience, but this time we want to to incorporate the gender kind of aspect to make it more inclusive. And also we are moving from the urban areas to the rural areas and mountainous areas in Vietnam. And then the second project is about sustainable transport for optimizing infrastructure investment in the Mekong Delta, trying to kind of streamline a multimodal network where some of the transport takes place on roads and some of it on waterways in the Mekong. Next slide, please. Now, this project is something that we started working on, but unfortunately, we tried already to apply for funding twice, but we were not successful. So we are working on it without funding. We thought we found a great acronym for it. It's Empower for employing participatory optimization for women equality and resilience in Vietnam. And with Professor Kati Khotiadis here in Kent, we are developing a new framework, which is called participatory optimization, where we are trying to use software and the soft system methodologies in combination with optimization to involve the stakeholders in a more meaningful and structured ways in the development of optimization models. And this is really key, I think, even more so in developing countries where there are so many different stakeholders involved and so many complexities to be captured into a model. So we hope that we can progress this project even without funding so far. Next slide, please. So the following project, as I said, is not really a scientific project on a specific problem, but it was a project which was funded by EPSRC to build the operational research capacity in Southeast Asia. Next slide, please. So it involved 8 different universities in 5 countries, including Cambodia, Laos, Indonesia, Myanmar, and Vietnam. We had 9 academics, like professors from these universities, and 8 early career researchers. And this project involved not only the University of Kent, but also Southampton and Lancaster. Next slide, please. So at the final workshop of the Osiris project that I described before, we basically ran a workshop where we involved different stakeholders, academics, but also people from industry and the government to brainstorm about potential challenges in the other countries. And then we decided to apply for this project that had as objectives to develop OR academic leaders and also early career researchers in Vietnam who could really develop OR as a field, identify some key challenges in each country that could be addressed by using operational research. We develop a portfolio of research proposals for subsequent funding, and then we wanted to create a self-sustaining OR community. Next slide, please. So we ran several capacity building activities to train both academics and the leaders in OR and the early career researchers. And I have to say that I have to thank the Operational Research Society in the UK because they were extremely supportive. First of all, they gave us a lot of in-kind contributions. So they allow our early career researchers and academics from the developing countries to attend their conference, the annual conference, for free, to become members for free. And Gavin Beckett also gave a very nice talk, the ones which I highlighted as the OR societies, because I gave a talk about the functionalities of the OR society, the resources, the events that they run, so that our leaders in OR could have an example of how to set up and run an OR society. Next slide, please. So one of the outcome of this project was the foundation and establishment of the Southeast Asia OR network. So in fact, if you look at the groupings of IFORs, for example, this part of the world is completely underrepresented. Even if they have upwards, which is the Asian Pacific OR group, none of the countries we were working on actually has an OR society. So the mainland Southeast Asia is completely underrepresented. So we gave them a tool to work together and to train their early career researchers and also to support the establishment of OR society linked to efforts and efforts. And in fact, as an outcome of this project, Indonesia, which is the country more advanced in terms of OR development, has applied to become a national society and a member of efforts. Next slide, please. Now, I have the last 5 minutes just to briefly talk about the projects that we are running in Africa. So through one of the conferences linked to the Global Challenges Research Fund that we run here in Kent, I got in touch with Doctors with Africa QAM, which is an NGO operating in 8 different countries in Africa. And what they do, basically, they manage and run their hospitals and health systems. So throughout in the last 5-6 years, we have tried to work on many different projects. The ones that I will focus on today is about optimizing health services in the refugee camps in Ethiopia. Again, we are struggling to find funding now for these projects. One we tried is the one that has been cancelled in March, but we keep trying. Another one was about optimizing the emergency obstetric care system in South Sudan. So if you think of the Sustainable Development Goals, Goal 3 is the one about good health and well-being. And I mentioned like different targets. So target number 1, for example, is by 2030 to reduce maternal deaths so that you don't have more than 70 per 100,000 live births. Now, if you look on the country profile of South Sudan, which was our area of study, the maternal deaths are 1,150. So as I said, the target is 70, and no country should have more than 140. And here we are more than 10 times as much. So completely like very, very far away from achieving the targets. And South Sudan, in fact, is the first in the world in terms of maternal mortality ratio. The third project is about mental health services in Tanzania. So we have just submitted a proposal to the Wellcome Trust, and we are waiting for the results. So next slide. So the problem that we were working on in Ethiopia, they are now hosting a lot of refugees coming from Sudan, which is, as you probably know, like where there are really big wars and famine, a very, very unstable political situation. So in the Gambella area of Ethiopia, which is the one represented in the maps, they have 7 refugee camps, accounting for about 400,000 refugees, which is almost the same size of the population of this region. So they have as many refugees as the local population. Now in these 7 camps, so you can see, for example, the biggest one is the Nugueniel camp with 112,000 refugees. And it only says 2 health posts. So they have a very, very limited facilities for health, and they have very limited doctors and nurses as well. So Doctors with Africa approached us because they wanted to make a case with donors for opening new health posts, new health centers, and to have more workforce. So the problem that they faced was to identify the best location for health posts and health centers, to allocate different services like maternal, high care, and to allocate also the workforce among these different refugee camps in terms of nurses, midwives, doctors, and so on. Now, the problems that they have is that the health posts need to be very, very close, like no more than a 20-minute walk. Obviously, in these camps, they don't have any kind of vehicles or motorbikes or cars. The health centers also, they need to be as close as possible because that's where the ambulances are located to go to the hospitals, and they have major restrictions in terms of workforce availability. Next slide, please. So what we wanted to do is to set up a model to minimize the distance that the refugees have to go to reach their closest health post where the basic services are provided, minimize also the maximum distance to the health centers where they can go for emergencies or where the ambulances are located, and also to minimize the excess demand at each health facilities. So as you can imagine that they don't have an appointment system, so the refugees just go to the health post and they wait until they can be seen. So it was important to allocate all the refugees in a meaningful way so as to avoid excess demand. Next slide. So those are just preliminary results, but for example, here you can see one of the refugee camps where the red dots are the demand points, and you can see the triangle are the candidate locations for health posts, and the square the candidate location for health centers. So you can see what is the coverage radius for the health posts and the health centers on the figure on the right. Next slide, please. Yeah, and this is a similar pictures displaying now the coverage of the optimal location of health posts and health centers for two different refugee camps. Next slide, please. So in terms of future research, those are it's just a brief outline of the projects we have worked on so far, but I hope that you are convinced now that there are really endless possibilities for OR and analytics in developing countries, and a huge potential really to save life, to deal with major disasters with the healthcare services, major potential to reduce inequality, to promote sustainable and inclusive growth, to mitigate the impacts of climate change, and also a strong focus now is on achieving food security. Next slide. So the key takeaways are that to work on these projects, in many cases you have to work on interdisciplinary projects. So I've worked, as I mentioned, with meteorologists, hydrologists, transport economists. For the problems in Africa, I'm working with doctors, with public health experts, and with health economists, and so on. You deal with multiple stakeholders. It's very important to engage the communities, and therefore I've become a big promoter now of participatory approaches and software SSM. David here knows that I venture in the software stream at the recent conference in Leeds. It's very important to have a genuine and equitable partnership with the local people, have the real knowledge of the context. There is a strong focus on gender, sensitive, responsive, or transformative approaches to include the gender in the models. And this is something that I would like now to bring to into our models. There is not much in the literature in terms of really modeling the gender aspects in our mathematical models. So that's something that we are trying to do, which we discuss also at the LEAD conference in the Wisdom session. Capacity building is very important. Unfortunately, without funding, it's very difficult to work on these projects. Data is always a big issue, and it's also fundamental, the support of learning societies. So with this, I take an opportunity to thank the OR Society for all the help that I've received in my projects in terms of support letters, in-kind contributions, and I hope to continue these lines of research with the involvement of the OR Society. Thank you. I'm above by 3 minutes. Yeah, those are the websites about two of the projects that I described today in case you want more information.
Thank you very much, Paola, for very interesting presentation and excellent balance between description of problems, impact of the research, and modeling techniques that you modeling.
Yeah, I try to avoid the modeling details just because I mean there is a very wide audience, so there was no time and to report all the optimization models.
I may ask the audience to use either chat option, or if you want to unmute yourself and ask question in person, please.
Bob, you've got a question.
Yeah, hi, Maria Paola. This just serves as another example of a fantastic project where OR is bringing clarity from confusion. And the one aspect, aside from the formulation of the problem itself, and all of the mathematical symbols that you very clearly showed us on the screen, that data visualization is so impactful in demonstrating the benefits to clients. Do you have anything to say on that?
Yeah, that's very, very key. In fact, this is one problem that we encounter also in the development of participatory optimization and in selling optimization models to stakeholders. Like for researchers in simulation, it's a little bit easier because simulation is a visualization. So if you approach doctors and show them a nice model with the people moving around in the system, but when you approach stakeholders with an optimization model, it's very, very difficult, especially at the beginning when you need to try to find the information and the data from them. So that's why now I'm going towards software, because with Kati we developed this structured way of getting the data, the information, and talking to the stakeholders in a language which is not optimization based. But at the end, in fact, in every project, we always have a budget also to develop a decision support system, because it's very important for them to be able to visualize things on the map. So for the project in Africa, for example, the results that I presented are really, really very initial, very preliminary. But when we talk to the stakeholders and to the doctors in Africa, we wanted to visualize even the preliminary solutions, because they understand what they are trying to do. I'm trying to cover within that radius as many people as possible. And then all of a sudden they appreciate the model and they're more keen about working with us and giving us more and more data and information. So yeah, it's a question. It's a combination of visualization and structured way of ways of interacting with the stakeholders.
Okay. I can't see, Sarah. Maybe you can help me. I can't see. Are there more questions from the audience? I can see.
I can't see anybody else's
chat.
hand up. I've flipped through. Nobody else has got their hand up.
Paola, I have one question. You're talking about using OR in mitigating emergencies or responding to emergencies in developing countries. What about UK? To my knowledge, OR can be applied here.
I have to say that I started my research initially for man-made disasters like 20 years ago, even more now, after 9/11, the Twin Towers. So my initial research, in fact, was on mitigating man-made disasters. Then I go a little bit where the funding is and there are more chances of application. So in 2015, I decided to move towards developing countries and natural disasters, because, because I'm more passionate about those kind of problems, but also because I could really get the funding to work on projects. Now I'm coming back to the UK. So I've attended a couple of weeks ago. In fact, I'm working with Transport for the South England, developing their resilience strategy, because yes, they have a lot of floods here in Canterbury. Like we had the torrential rains in the last 2 days. I mean, really unbelievable. And there are a lot of flooded car parks and so on. So yes, I'm working now as well. And I mentioned the problem in Texas. I mean, I was really shocked that, for example, they didn't have the sirens, warning sirens located there, because it's a very simple optimization problem where to locate the minimum numbers of sirens to cover all the area across, along the river. So there are so many things that can be done. And again, OR has a major role to minimize the cost, to improve the efficiency of decisions. And it's true in developing countries, but more here as well. Yes, in the UK, in the United States.
Okay, thank you very much, Paola, for very interesting presentation. And thank you for accepting to give us your talk.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation again.